You're not stupid or naive. You're perfectly capable of seeing the signs. You know this person isn't really showing up for a full relationship. They don't make time for you. Maybe they even keep you hidden from the rest of their life. They don't follow through, or worse, they make it clear that they're keeping you around for their own convenience. Sure, maybe they do go through the motions. Maybe they make you feel special when they're actually with you. But you don't really have access to them in the way that feels good. And in the end, you're left with nothing because you're not included in the rest of their life. And somehow you continue. You find ways to justify this to yourself. You tell yourself that they're just going through something, and you think, if I show them how much I care, how deeply I love them, how much I can be there for them, maybe they'll finally come around and treat me in a way that I treat them. So you try a little bit harder. You do everything you can to prove that you have a place in their life, that you're worthy of their attention. But this isn't the first time. You've been here before. Different name, different face, same pattern. You show up all the way, you give them your energy, your attention, your love, and they just take until there's barely anything left of you to give, until, frankly, there's barely anything left for you. So maybe the real question isn't, why do people keep using me? Maybe it's, why do I keep attaching to people who use me? Why do I keep investing in people who don't give me anything back? Let's talk about that today. Let's talk about what this pattern really is, how it started, and how you can teach yourself to start choosing something different so that you don't continue involving yourself in the same types of failed relationships. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. And around here, we talk a lot about how trauma and emotional dysregulation, how these things shape the way we relate to love, to dating, and to our own self-worth. And we do this so that we can finally build relationships that feel good to us.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share, and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow, and I appreciate it so much.
When we hear the word abandonment, we usually imagine something absolute, like someone going out for a morning run and never coming back. And we think, well, that didn't happen to me, so I must not have abandonment issues. But abandonment takes much subtler forms, especially in the first few formative years of childhood. Maybe your parents split up, and then one of them went off and started a new family. Let's say we're talking about your dad, and even though he didn't completely disappear, you still saw your dad on weekends, or you spent time at his place on the weekends with his new family. But still, something had changed. Maybe he had a new wife or a new girlfriend, maybe even new kids, a whole new life. And even if he still came to see you regularly, or you spent your weekends at his house, he had abandoned the role that he originally had in your life. So the rules changed on you, right? And even if we understand why this happens as adults, because separations and divorce are a part of life, we change, our roles in each other's lives can change as well. But as kids, it doesn't really matter how reasonable the explanation is, because children don't operate on logic, they operate on felt experience. And when the people we love most stop showing up in the way we're used to, when they stop being available the way that we need them to be, we feel abandoned, even if they didn't really walk away completely, or they meant well, or even if it was for the best that our parents split up. So if they kept doing some version of showing up, to us as children, we still felt the perceived abandonment. So it's not always about someone disappearing completely. Sometimes it's about the way they stopped relating to us, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. Perceived abandonment also includes the feeling that we were abandoned even though no one actually left. For example, maybe you had a parent who took care of your basic needs, who fed you and clothed you and got you to school every day and did all the responsible parenting things, but they didn't ask how you were doing. They didn't check in to see how you were feeling. They weren't invested or perhaps even interested in who you were in your emotional world, and they essentially left you alone with your own emotional needs. That's what we could say is perceived abandonment. And it still leaves a mark because in those early years of life, we're incredibly attuned to the small ways that our caregivers are present or not just physically, but emotionally. And to cope with that kind of abandonment, we start building structures inside of ourselves, ways of adapting to feel a little bit better, a little bit safer. And because we don't have control over how our caretakers behave, we turn inward, because that's the only thing we have some degree of control over. And in this way, we convince ourselves of all kinds of things. If I don't need too much, or if I can find the way to prove my worth, if I'm nicer, if I'm less trouble, then maybe I won't be abandoned again. So in our early years, we used this strategy on our caregivers. We tried to adapt in this way to affect the way that our caregivers relate to us. And then later as adults, we test these same tactics on our partners. We don't do it consciously, at least not as a rule, but we do it. And this adaptation of not expecting too much and not needing anyone to really take good care of us, learning to tolerate inconsistency, that becomes the foundation we build our adult relationships on. One of the most obvious ways we end up letting people into our lives who are likely to use us or to abandon us is by ignoring the red flags. And when I say ignore, I don't mean we don't see them. We see the red flags just fine. There's nothing wrong with our perception. What's off is how we interpret those red flags. So even though, let's say, we notice someone only texts us late at night, we tell ourselves there must be a good reason for it. Or when our partner doesn't show up to dates, cancels at the last minute, doesn't invite us to hang out with their family, we make excuses for them. And instead of backing up and deciding it's not acceptable to be interacted with in this way, we continue seeing them and we continue being emotionally involved, staying in the relationship. We stay invested. It's not that we don't feel when something is off. We feel it just fine. But early trauma leads us to develop some very complex ways of explaining things away. And instead of looking at their behavior, which would be the healthy response, we look inward because that's what we're used to. We start wondering if we are doing something wrong. And this is how we end up overfunctioning in relationships because we already carry that internalized belief from childhood that when someone is inconsistent, it must be because we're not quite getting the formula right on what would please this other person enough to care for us and to love us properly or sufficiently. So when a partner starts acting in a way that mirrors how our original caregivers acted, we take it on ourselves to try to fix it. We tell ourselves there's obviously something wrong with me. I'm not being accepting enough or cool enough or easy enough for them to like me. At least not enough for them to show up and love me properly, which means I can do better, right? But all the while, there's a part of us that knows. We see the signs adding up. But because we grew up with people who were inconsistent, we learned how to compartmentalize. We learned how to basically split people into parts. The part that's kind and respectful and emotionally available, and then the part that's distant or careless or unavailable or even mean and cruel. And we made peace with that contradiction in people because in a lot of cases, what gave us abandonment issues in the first place was growing up with parents who were dual in their behavior towards us. So in order to receive love and care at all, we had to accept that people are contradictory, that someone can show up for you in one moment and love you and completely dismiss you or treat you badly the next day. And we did this because we had to. I mean, we needed the care of our parents when we were little. We needed their love in whatever form it came. So we learned to take the bad parts with the good. It's not like we could pack up our bags and live somewhere else. We didn't have the power to do that. So we had to accept the whole package, whether it felt good or not. I'll give you an example from my own childhood that I hope can illustrate this, and from my own upbringing in general. I grew up with a father who was wildly inconsistent in his behavior with me, and I think in general. He was emotionally volatile. He couldn't be trusted to manage his own emotional reactions in a lot of situations, really. It was more than that. I mean, he was a very wounded man who'd grown up very hurt and abused and wounded by his own childhood. And I think he was now sort of diffusing his own misery to his current family, Probably because his bad feelings were overwhelming for him to deal with. See how I can do that? Excuse emotional abuse? Because I grew up as an anxious little person just trying to like squeeze some love out of this wounded rock that was my father. But he was also intelligent and really funny and charming. He was talkative and interesting. And because he involved me in his thoughts and in his inner world that was full of books and debates and philosophies and adventures, having access to this world was a fascination to me as a child. So in this way, I felt valued somehow to be included in this world that he had in his own head. And at the exact same time, deeply rejected. And because of this, I learned to love contradiction in people. So when I come across someone who feels split, someone who's visibly conflicted in their personality or their character or even their behavior, I feel deeply, instantly drawn to them. And that attraction has never led to anything healthy, shockingly, right? Because what I'm actually drawn to is dysfunction. It's unhealthy in the other person, and it's unhealthy for me. But the original imprint is there permanently. It was wired in early. Over the years, I've gotten to a place where I can say out loud, oh, I'm obviously attracted to this person because they're emotionally conflicted or because they seem to have some very conflicting character traits. This is a good person who does bad things or a bad person who does good things. Because that kind of contradiction reminds me of a very old pattern, namely, my father. And I can recognize that now as a red flag, but for a part of my adult life, I didn't know that. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand why I was attracted to these kinds of split personality people. It took me years and some serious blunders to figure it out. But when we're not conscious of these things, and when we come across someone who treats us like an afterthought, or who wants to be with us sometimes but then disappears without explanation, or who's affectionate and loving only when it suits them, or a decent person some days and a horrible human the next, or who wants to be affectionate only in secret and then goes home to their husband. We start to accept and even normalize these things because this kind of compromise, this ability to compartmentalize people is already baked into our blueprint for what love should feel like. So we just focus on the good parts, right? And we appreciate the version of them that's kind or charming or passionate, and we put the rest, the stuff we don't want to see, the hurt and confusion and disrespect, into this little box off to the side, and we try not to look at it closely or too often. Because on some level, what we're doing is we're trying to separate love from pain. That's something we had to learn early, especially if we were loved by someone who also neglected us, right? Who didn't show care, didn't respond to our needs, didn't handle us with emotional kindness. We couldn't get rid of that person. We were children. I mean, we needed this person, right? So then we learned to tolerate both, to accept that love comes with, insert your own damage here. And we did this to get what we could. And the longer we had to do that as kids, the more deeply that belief got wired into us. Love and pain come together as a package. And if you want love, you have to just stop making a big deal about the pain. When love and pain get tangled, it's hard to see things clearly. So if you found yourself drawn to these kinds of dynamics, to people who confuse you with their duality, who make you feel great one moment and then anxious and unsure and bad about yourself the next, don't be so hard on yourself. Most of the time, you have to look back at your early years to understand why you're attracted to people like this and why it's so hard to let them go. But it is worth asking, what feels familiar to me? When it comes to love, when it comes to connection, what does my nervous system recognize as normal? And then try not to judge it so harshly. Don't get caught up in deciding whether it's right or wrong. Just take a moment to look at what that early blueprint might actually look like in you. Because until you become conscious of it, you'll keep reaching for that same kind of love. Not necessarily because you want pain, but because somewhere deep down you might believe that pain is just part of the deal. And you have to accept it. And it's only when you start seeing this clearly that this kind of pattern can start to lose its grip. Bit by bit, you can start working with it. And in a video that's coming up, we're going to talk about how to shift this pattern, and we'll get specific about how we unintentionally train people to treat us like we are disposable, how we can teach other people to give us the bare minimum, enough just to keep us around, and what it looks like to step out of that so that we can start building mutual and emotionally solid relationships. So if you enjoy this type of content, stick around, consider liking and subscribing so we can keep healing together. Until next time.